21. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Holly.
Here.
Rhodes.
Here.
St. Clair. Here. Hitzke.
Here.
Gallegos.
Here.
Tinkerhut. Here. Pelletier.
Here.
Okay, the first item on our agenda, as always, is citizens' comments. The Board of Education welcomes citizen input. Citizens are reminded to limit their comments to 3 minutes, and also that matters regarding employees or confidential student matters will not be allowed, nor will the board respond. If you would like to make a comment at tonight's board meeting, please click the raise hand icon on the bottom of the screen. Okay, seeing no comments and no one in the audience, we will proceed with the meeting. The first item on today's agenda is District 75 reports, and the first one is from the superintendent's office.
Good evening, everyone. Tonight, the first report we have is a follow-up from a request earlier in the year, and it's about the school report card. Hope we can put the school report card presentation up. So the school report card was developed to be able to demonstrate how each public school is doing in regards to a number of different metrics that were established by the Illinois State Board of Education. And it was meant to be all encompassing, meaning academic, behavioral, general statistics, and also the activities that take place in the building that might not be visible just through a normal report card. That was the original intent. So what they did is they created the school report card page and made it look like a dashboard. Got the clicker? So this is an example of what the typical dashboard would look like, where it goes through, it shows total enrollment. And this is our actual report card from 2018-19. And it gives different breakdowns of percentages by different demographics and also outlines academic performance right here, where you can see where green's in the area that you'd want to see the percentage of students be in. The yellow is in the emerging, and then below that are the areas that we would say need to see more improvement from. So the whole purpose of this was really for people, if they were interested in wanting to be able to have access to a report card. It was consistent amongst public schools. This information itself, schools have to populate this in through the IWAS website, which is part of the Illinois State Board of Education, and it's pulled directly from there. So ultimately, the information that's up here is only as good as people that put it in and making sure we're verifying. And they do have a process where we have to go through for the public school and verify that. We get approximately 30 days or 1 month to be able to go through our data and confirm that it is accurate to the best of our knowledge. And then we have to report off on that. Now, we know in the past roughly almost coming up to 2 years, there's been some changes to our calendar, mainly due to the pandemic. So that when you look at it, and then we go to the next report card, then we put the blank one. Oh, there you go. So here's our 2019-20 school report card. When you look at it, basically what it's saying is they left pretty much everything the same because of the pandemic with reporting that was taking place. And that's one of the things that we've seen this year, which really brought up some of the questions now with what are we doing to be able to address this, or how is this impacting us or not? So essentially what the state did, they waived all of the academic pieces from last year. And the ratings that schools received, and we'll get into this more later, stayed the same from the prior year. All of our schools are listed as commendable, and you'll see later in the report, that's where the bulk of the schools are in grades K through 8. So all of it really carried over. So the origins of the school report, did I go back the wrong way? No, yep, Oregon. So this was the part I was talking to you about, going through the Iowa system and how it's getting input from the data. So that's how they get it. And then they do have state reports where our students do take some of the state assessments. That's automatically populated into those different subsections at the state to where they pull that from them. The part that got us talking about this year was, when you looked at it, was release dates. In a typical year, the state informs us approximately in September that the school report card will be released in the month of October and that we need to verify data. Due to the pandemic this past year, they informed us that they're going to have 3 different release dates, just because of when they were able to obtain all the different data and the testing time frame for when people were submitting that data, so they can get everybody back on the same track. So when they did that, they outlined it for us as the following. So the 29th was the initial release, and really the bulk of that was what I'd say is our internal district data, meaning attendance, student enrollment, staff enrollment, designation for staff as far as who has a master's degree, attendance, those types of items that they knew they could really have already in advance. Then when it started to move forward this past December 2nd, they started to get some of the data. Now, one of the questions that came out in board questions, why is there a separation in there? We were never actually told why they broke it down this way. What we're able to figure out going through State Board of Ed, calling people, it's because of the different timing of when schools are completing tests. So they're trying to give people multiple opportunities through this year to complete the data and to get it submitted, give them a time to review it, to make sure it's accurate before they'll put it up on the dashboard page. So that's for all grades, K through 12. So we've got 3 different release dates. The last one is April 27th. At that point, all the data should be done and in. So during the month of April, we should be verifying that information is correct. And then we need to anticipate the final report card for this year will come out on April 27th. And then essentially we'll start the process all over again, coming back in October. But that's timeline for us. A little bit more about the report card itself. Approximately 5 years ago, when they were getting ready to do evidence-based funding, they were setting percentages for how they wanted to determine scores for schools. What I have up here for you is both K-8 and 9-12. What's important is you get to see the breakdown here of how they're looking at the data. So 25% is in English for growth, 25% in math and growth, the different tests. This past year, in addition to those 2, they also had the math proficiency and the ELA proficiency. They added science to it for 5%. So one of the key parts that I want to be able to share with you when I'm pointing out the science, we didn't know until the end of last year that science was going to be one of the additions to how schools are going to be graded. Now, we should be doing stuff that follows along the science guidelines and standards for the nation. But it'd also be helpful to know exactly how they're using that in rating schools, right? So we know what to prepare for how they're reporting it. And the other one I'll share with you is, let's see, where's the attendance? This one, 20%, chronic absenteeism. So that is when a student misses 10% or more of a school year. That's significant because it can be documented differently. And we'll get into this a little bit more. I'll share with you when we do our board review of 108 press policy. In there, there's an update, and not saying the update's wrong or bad or anything, but this is a clear example of where our legislature and our State Board of Education do not talk. So 20% of how public schools are rated is on chronic absenteeism. In Press 108, there's a new press policy that we need to allow anybody to be able to have 5 mental health days out of school for students without reason. So what that does, we've just said right off the bat, potentially everybody could just take those 5 days. They need them, great. We want to support that, but then the state shouldn't be counting so much of our percentage of our attendance towards the number of students that are or are not in the building if they're passing that type of legislation. And that's gonna affect all public schools. So just something to be mindful of as we go through it. The other part, so I said this is the 5th year. This pie circle, one of the key things with using data is you like to measure things over time, keeping them consistent. How many years in a row do you think this pie chart has remained the same in the last 5 years? 0. So it keeps moving. And it's not like we get big notices in advance of how that's moving. So it's information for you so that you know what public schools are trying to work through as we get the dashboard information and putting it up, with it being a snapshot. So it could be a little bit more of an efficient system. It's better than what we've had before, but we'll still keep advocating that there are some changes made to it so there's more consistency. So before I go there, the other part with the designations, and this is where it gets into the growth versus proficiency. So proficiency wise, it's on an achievement scale. So what they're essentially saying by 2032, all students will be at 90% proficient, no matter where you are. So what that means is they've identified different subgroups. A subgroup means 20 individuals or more. So you have to have 20 people in that subgroup, whether it's a student with 20 students with an IEP, 20 Caucasian students, 20 students with EL services. You've got to have at least 20 before that'll be counted. So what they're saying, they broke all those categories down. And what they're saying is every category has to be at 90% in 2032. So if there's an anticipation that you get behind in a category, you've got to make up that much more to actually get the points to make yourself, as a school district, to earn for the proficiency rating. So if nothing else, ladies and gentlemen, once those proficiency ratings get to roughly 80%, you're going to start seeing schools' scores go down. Because students learn at different rates and paces through every grade level. So that's something as public schools we need to be mindful of, that when we do go to public functions and our legislators are at, legislative people are at, we need to keep bringing this to their attention. Because what will end up happening is when we get to the different ratings for commendable, satisfactory, or needs improvement, you're going to see more Illinois public schools going down into potentially needs improvement. So we need to be mindful of that. Now it's a little ways off, but that's where we need to start advocating as far as a public school would be. So this is the key point. They take all that to get to the dashboard, use that data. Ultimately, it's about the summative designation. The summative designation was brought up when the state decided to go to evidence-based funding. So this is the politics of education. You had one side of the aisle wanting to provide more funding for public education. You had one side of the aisle not wanting to provide as much funding for public education. So the compromise was, okay, what if we give a summative designation to say if you're on the top, doing fine, commendable, needs improvement, or unsatisfactory? Because the point was, legislature wanted to be able to say, look, we're filtering these X amount of dollars into public schools. And are they or are they not improving based off of that increase of funds? Does that make sense? So they're using this down in Springfield to determine evidence-based funding that we get. Is that making an impact or not? So what does it all mean? They're using multiple measures to be able to go through how we're working. The multiple measures are the chronic absenteeism, the proficiency, the achievement grade levels that you saw in that pie chart. Then they want to be able to use those to say which student groups need more support or are high performing. So it's supposed to be a designation. Now, the good thing about that is when we do get the reports, it does identify, and you can find out which students in those subgroups fell below that threshold line. So at least for us, and this is what we did 2 or 3 months ago, we had Kathy Weber come out to meet with our building teams. We went through the documents that we get through the state. And just to give you a frame of reference, The binders every building received were probably about 4 inches thick of data that they had to sift through because each one of them was by student essentially. So that we could cross-reference which students were in those categories. We were able to see maybe if we had recording errors, because that can happen. That we would know what we needed to do differently procedurally for us. And like one of them was looking at our attendance to be able to go back and make sure we're coding our students correctly, especially this year, because if a student's out for COVID right now and for potentially being a close contact, that doesn't count as an absence now. That's really important to be able to know, because that would impact the attendance. So that's what they're using to be able to help get the designation. There are 4 of them. The highest you can get is being exemplary, and you're in the top 10% statewide. It's still very hard to figure out how they get to the top 10%. Because they do cutoffs. One of the questions was really good with, what does it mean lowest performing? Well, it's the lowest 5% of the Title I schools, essentially. So what that means is after they do their scores, they find out where's the lowest 5%, where's the highest 10%. Those are their correct scores. Top and bottom. So they're creating a bell curve, right? They're weighting it essentially. So again, you have a moving target in some regards as a public school if you're trying to really get to a certain status. The commendable, you'll see, is the majority of the public schools in the state of Illinois, and then underperforming. And the key part to what's the difference really, you're looking at no underperforming student groups to be commendable. That means in your subgroups of 20 or more, we had none of those subgroups underperforming in any of the areas for their threshold rate. To go to underperforming, 1 or more. So what the theory was behind doing this, you could have a school district that's doing exceptionally well, which would meet this criteria. But if they have 1 or more students in this area, this is where they go. So it's trying to make a system in place that helped keep all schools more accountable for all students. That's really the biggest difference between these 3. Looking at that. So where are we? So we waived last year because of the pandemic. We're going to go back through that process now. So we will be getting different calculations coming in for the next year. That's that timeline that they shared with us to be able to go through. Oops. Right here, it's staying the same. So that's what we'll see for us. There's no 21 annual designation change for us, which would be fine. I wouldn't even estimate we would be doing that anyway, when you look at where some of the thresholds are. So they're not calculating it again, just because it's going into the new year. That's what we've been told. Now, we could finish this meeting tonight and I'll have a message in my email box saying they're going to do it. That could happen. I don't anticipate that, but just it's kind of how we've functioned and working back and forth with Springfield. So I think for us to give perspective, so these are the numbers for all the public schools K-8. So there's a total just over 3,000 public schools K-8 in Illinois. So when they went back and they did the designations for commendable, whoops, I gotta get my buttons right. Top 10%, bottom 5%. Here you go. Cut score to be top 10% was 80.12. Lowest performing was 35.3. So you can see for us, our schools all landed right here in the majority where commendable was in the 2000 range. Numbers for exemplary for 334. And then, so underperforming, they had at least one subgroup that didn't meet their cut score. And then lowest performing, those are the 5% lowest performing Title I schools in the state of Illinois, all for just K-8 buildings. That doesn't tell you a lot like where we are at. So when you start breaking down our numbers and what we looked at, here's our scores. Washington was 8.5 points away. Mechanics Grove was closer. And Sandburg was pretty close too. So we were roughly 10 points away from hitting that status. I'd anticipate it staying there. I think it depends as we look into the future, as you get closer to 2032. I'd like to think we'd have 90% of our students meeting where we want them to be and being at grade level. Certainly a goal. I don't know if that will happen, but it's something we'll strive for. I still think that we'll be in a commendable area though, as we keep going forward. So here's where we were before the pandemic. Lisa.
So just so I understand the numbers, there's a gross score per district. Then it looks like schools get it. So then each subgroup then will have a score on the scale, the same scale, or?
So the school gets an overall score, which is here. So Washington overall, that was their score. And what they do, let's just take the ELA proficiency. They took the ELA test that they use for proficiency. They looked at all of the student scores and they said, okay, this percentage they get because this group scored here. They get this many points because this group scored here to get a composite number for English. So out of the 100 points, if it was 25, we may have got 20% of those points.
It's fine. I just am trying, we went through this on the pre-meeting. It's kind of like a black hole of stats or whatever you want to call it. So
Yes.
I'm just trying to put some structure in my mind around it. And I'm not sure I'll get there, but we don't need to take up time.
So it's not straightforward. It's essentially saying in English language proficiency, just say here's 7 subgroups. We're getting so many points for each one of you. And then they compile that and they say, okay, that's the total of 80 points. Then they multiply it by 25% or 20%, whatever they thought was the appropriate number. That's the actual number score we get. And that's that full day in service that we went through with Kathy so we could understand it better.
Kind of an arbitrary number, in other words.
Yes, Kathy said for herself she needed to dig it out. Now, this is something T would probably love, because just give her the numbers and let her go.
No, but I'm just thinking from a public standpoint, or even our standpoint, just trying to understand the scorecard, the report card, and somebody deciding where to go, it's kind of convoluted to make a decision and base some choices on where you buy a house or.
Well, they're counting on that people won't ask questions, and all they're gonna look for is, am I here
Or
or
their,
here?
or-
Yep, and heaven forbid, if I'm gonna move in a community where all the schools is here. And the sad thing is, there could be some schools that unfairly are represented in that area. I mean, just if you have a subgroup, say of 25 students, it's terrible that they're not being proficient in a certain area. But by no means should that hold back the entire school district. Or have it designated that way. I mean, that they didn't want to grade schools, but they're grading schools. So I'll do the best I can to answer the questions. A lot of them I might have to follow back with other people. I mean, we continually call to find out, get clarification as well. And as once our report card becomes final again, we'll make sure you're aware that it is out and published.
Those 2 thresholds, those are for our state, correct?
Correct. This is just Illinois.
Do we know how those compare to the thresholds in other states
No,
at all?
because some other states don't have similar school report card. They use different percentages.
Okay.
Yeah, it's all state dependent.
This might be something next year when Christie's down there with that committee,
The delegate.
the delegates. Especially
I would agree with you, Rose, Ray. I would agree with you, Mr. Rose, that could be a nice ask to allow you for a cleaner, clearer school report card.
this whole thing with even at 20%, And then putting those 5 days in there. You've lost control of the whole process and you're getting graded on what you don't have any control over.
I guess one could argue that depending on how you're running your school and whether or not your students need those 5 mental health, I mean, I don't know.
That's the struggle that I think most public schools have, Christie.
Yeah.
We can't ask why
No.
you
And
need it.
I know.
And that's the part, like, well, if a student needs that, tell us, and then let us be able to support. One of the things in 108, we've got to decide, in talking with admin, how are we gonna be able to ask? Say, I call and say, hey, so-and-so is gonna take a mental health day. How am I asking, how can we support you then? We don't know if we can do that yet.
So for that chronic absenteeism portion, is that unexcused absences or any absences? So even if you're gone for a religious holiday, that counts?
Any,
Wow.
Because again,
Any.
you know, when you're not including religious holidays into your calendar, you are already guaranteeing some kids are missing school, which then puts them behind in other ways and whatever.
Mhm.
But that already, that might create mental health days, but whatever,
yes,
because, you know, you're already starting behind the eight ball there.
exactly right. Any day, could be a doctor's excuse, religious holiday, any of them. They all, if you're not in the building, you're considered out. Now, you don't hit chronic absenteeism until you hit that 10% threshold.
Right.
But it all adds up.
Yeah, but you could get to that point really quick.
Yes,
10% of the days, though, that's a lot of time to be missed, but.
Mhm.
And I mean, and those 5 mental health days don't put you over that, right? It's not like 5 equals 10% of your
Right.
time frame. So that definitely would have to be indicating that you're missing a lot of school.
Mhm.
And I get that, and that, you know, on some level, I see why that's part of that, but I don't know that adding the 5 mental health days by itself throws all of that off, because again, that's not gonna hit that
the total
threshold,
number.
but it's a factor to be considered to look at, but I don't know, we'll get to the delegate assembly, but given the things that are put through and yelled about and screamed about and argued about and whatever, I don't know if that's going anywhere, because I don't think anyone wants to get quite into that minutia of it. But we can talk. But I was just trying to, because it was a little confusing. One of the answers was, because I said, what year was the commendable ratings based upon? And so it was for the 18-19. My understanding is that the school will have a new designation. It was the answer. So, but then I thought you said you don't anticipate it changing from commendable. So I was a little confused by that.
So you're right. I didn't think it was gonna change for this year.
Meaning commendable to something else.
Right. It should stay commendable,
Okay,
yes.
so maybe you meant to say the school will not have a new designation.
What did I say?
It says will. My understanding is the school will have a new designation. When the next whatever is coming, because I was trying to understand,
Okay,
do we think that this is gonna change or,
I don't anticipate the rating changing regardless.
okay,
So even if with taking in the test scores in April, I'd still anticipate we'd still be at a commendable.
and then it was helpful to see that District 75 has always received a commendable rating. That's generally the historical, because that was the context I didn't have, not knowing like, we, you know,
Yeah.
when we hear about like our literacy numbers and everything, I just wasn't sure how that
Yep.
was impacting, so.
Okay. All right. Next part of our discussion then, really it's more for the board discussion. So joint annual conference was back in November, so this is the opportunity for us to be able to go through, share your sessions that you were able to attend. And highlight if there's something that you think that you'd like us from an administrative standpoint to look any further, or if there were topics that were more board specific for sessions that you attended, that are topics that you as a board would like to entertain more, to be able to bring those out. So I figured take roughly 3 to 5 minutes or whatever, each person kind of go around the room and share, have a little dialogue on that, and then be able to go from there. Do I have somebody that would want to start?
I didn't go, so I can go first. But so my question is, I did go to their website and try to look for presentations. And I found some, but I didn't find everyone that it appeared that everybody went to. So I guess my question is there anything you can share that isn't posted there? Or if I was just in the wrong area? Or do you have super secret access that I did that because you went? So that was my
So-
just basic question, because I was trying to look for some stuff.
Did you go, because I pulled it up, so I've got the conference handouts, is that the section you were in? There is a section, if you went to the joint annual conference, and then there was a section that said conference handouts, and you could go
Yeah, it
by
was
each.
by date, and there
By
seemed to
date?
be a few that
But the main, I think some of the ones you were referencing were some of the main ones. And those were in a separate spot, the general session ones. You were looking at those, because I was just floating around on here.
okay, well, maybe
But-
I can get with you. We can do it separate, but-
And I will say I didn't bring, I left my folder at home. I thought that I grabbed it and I grabbed the wrong one. But I did pull up enough that I think I can go through it. I didn't grab a lot of the handouts because, I mean, I grabbed a few, but because I thought they'd all be online, I didn't do that, but now I'm having trouble finding.
Well, I
Especially
think
when
I
I'm-
know, based on some of the reports you submitted, it identifies who went to one, so if there's one I can't find, maybe I'll just either email you, Christie, or email one of the people that went, and
Yeah.
say, hey, I can't find it.
And
Okay.
if they had handouts, we could certainly share. Sometimes they're, not all the handouts are in there, because it's dependent upon the presenter.
Sure, that could be too, maybe it
Putting
was
them in.
just the pre-form talk that didn't have much
Yeah.
associated. Okay.
Well, all right, I'll go first because this is a good segue for me. So I went to this one, the Practical Parliamentary Procedures, which was run by Dee Molinari, who used to be our field service rep. And she handed out this really cool, like laminated parliamentary motions guide. And so one of the things she stressed was that, in most of the board policies, Robert's Rules of Order is like, recommended you follow. It's not like the law that you have to follow. But I just thought it was really cool that she took the time to do this. And so I made copies for everybody. So if everyone wants a copy, I just thought it was interesting to see it. So it's two-sided, backside, and I have some extras too. If anyone is interested. Thought it was interesting. She is, as those of any of us, well, I guess not, maybe not any of us, when Dee was our field service rep, she can get a little chatty.
Oh,
So,
I see it. Yeah. we
Yeah,
hear it.
as you can imagine, she ran out of time pretty quickly because she was talking up in the storm. And the other thing was that I don't think she's a very good teacher because she was like handing these out herself, like personally. And I was like,
Delegating.
have someone hand them out for you, then you could talk up at them.
Right.
So anyway, so it was a really basic, I probably shouldn't have gone to it because it was really basic, but I was curious to see what it was gonna be about. So that was something that I took back that I thought would be interesting for you to look at. And then Jamie stepped out of the room, so I'll talk about this really quickly. I went to the second general section called the privileged poor. And Jamie really liked the presentation. I thought it was really kind of boring. I felt like he stood there and really read like off his thing. He wasn't that engaging to me. I don't know. I was a little disappointed in it. So and he just wasn't a very engaging, he's not a very engaging or dynamic speaker, but Jamie really liked it. So maybe it was better for someone that is involved in the administration in schools rather than a school board member, I suppose. And then another one I went to was superintendent evaluation pathways to a productive process. The guy who ran it, he was a really good facilitator. He was a really excellent speaker, but he was really stuck on his script. Like he wouldn't answer questions as you went along. And then we got to the end and there was like only like 5 minutes left. So we had time for like 2 questions. So I was a little disappointed. I feel like it was a disappointing day and I feel bad. Maybe I just picked the wrong ones. I don't know. But that one was kind of disappointing also. And then I went to probably the worst one that I went to was called No Weak Links, Fostering Positive Intra-Board Relationships. And the really frustrating thing was that the guy, there was a panel of people. One of them was an attorney from our law firm, Robin Schwartz. And then there was also a guy there who was a former board member from Naperville 203. And these two guys were really sort of, especially the Naperville guy, was really kind of pompous and like talked down to everybody. If people had a question, he would sort of talk down to them. It was just really disappointing. I was just,
That's kind of ironic, and he's facilitating the.
Yeah. like, positive relationship. It was just like, it was sort of jarring, like, you know, and then we go back to the attorney and he was just not.
Remember the board member's name?
I don't remember his name, yeah, but, and he used to be like in ISB, like leadership also.
Oh, okay.
And I was like, oh gee, like, so anyway, maybe, I don't know, it just came off bad. And then the last one I went to, I just wanted to share a few interesting tidbits. I went to the Sharing a Superintendent, a Path to Success. This was interesting because as much as District 75 and District 120, like, really studied the shared superintendent, really delved into it and spent a really long time, these two very incredibly rural school districts. These four really rural school districts. They're near each other, like in South Central Illinois, and the frustrating thing. Well, I'm sorry, I keep talking about the frustrating stuff, but it was just really frustrating. The two superintendents were there on the panel, and Krista, you will appreciate this. The person who was supposed to like run the session was at the delegate meeting. And she texted and said, I think I'm gonna be late to the panel because this is running long. And long story short, she never showed because I think she was
Yeah.
in the resolutions thing for so long. So it was just sort of fascinating. The genesis for them, so it's two superintendents in 4 districts. And so each of them has 2 districts, and sort of the way it first happened in the 2 districts was football. You know, they were down to not enough players, so they decided to combine football teams together. And that was the genesis for that to start. So they started with football. And then I think the next year they added a couple more sports. And then eventually now they do all sports, I think, except for like one of the schools doesn't have a couple of the teams. So it's all sports shared between the 2 schools. And then at some point they were like, hey, why don't we just share our superintendent also? And the other school just was like, that sounds like a great idea. So they, they just did it. It was just kind of crazy. And then the other one, which was sort of also very fascinating, the superintendent grew up and went to school in District A and actually taught there for a while, and then left and moved on and got his doctorate and became a superintendent of the neighboring school, District B. And then at some point, District A had an opening for a superintendent, and they said to the superintendent of District B, hey, why don't you come back and be our superintendent? You grew up here, and he was like, well, I don't want to leave the school district I'm in, A, because I really like it here, and B, like, District A is paying less than they're paying me at District B. And so that was the genesis for that. One of the board members said, well, hey, maybe you could be the superintendent of both schools. And the guy, because he grew up there, said, oh, well, I'm really open to doing that. Like, let's look at that. And a couple of months later, boom, they had a second superintendent. So it was just sort of fascinating how it, because I thought, oh, we went through this great process and we ended up with a great superintendent and everything so far is going pretty well. And then these other school districts just were like, yeah, let's do that. Okay. And so it was sort of fascinating. And then it was just really fascinating to hear the numbers, each district, all the 4 districts, it's, 400, 500 kids, huge districts in terms of square miles of real estate. The one superintendent talked about how, you really just roll up your sleeves and do whatever needs to be done. He had done about 20 school bus routes already this year because trouble with school bus drivers and everything. And so each district has 5 bus routes, and they're usually between 45 minutes and an hour long because the districts are so big. So it's a whole different world down there. It's just sort of fascinating to see the different things that go on. And like I said, it was like really eye-opening, because I guess I sort of imagine that some districts could just sort of come together really easily like that. But just to sit and hear them talk about the things they go through on a day-to-day basis. And they each have offices at both places. And the one superintendent is really adamant about, he spends the morning in one district and then drives 20 minutes to do the afternoon in the other district. And then some of his staff were joking about, oh, we always know you're going to be there in the morning and there in the afternoon. So then he started switching it up, and they totally got confused by the whole thing. But it sounded like a good idea to sort of switch it up. So it was just really interesting to see how 4 other districts did that same thing that we did. So that's what I have.
I'll go next. Is that okay?
Yes,
Yep.
All right. The frame of reference to start with, as I go through this, is looking at, in my perspective, like the board is new. That we're starting, even though there's folks that have been here for a while, there's in essence 4 new members. So that's what my frame of reference is. So the first session was the art of school boarding. And it was really turned into, in my mind, a foundation to build off of. Eric and I were actually in this one together. And they kind of started off with like some basic things about if you're going to have people complaining to you, what is your role as a school board member and what you should and shouldn't be doing, and how you move that the complaint to where it needs to be. The next thing that was really interesting, I thought, was they went through and identified the top 10 rules of school boarding. And they listed through a number of things that were very pertinent, I think, about the dealing of the board and the community, the dealing of the board and the superintendent, and knowing what each other's roles are so that we don't interfere and create an issue with the superintendent and what he's trying to do. But they basically talked about micromanaging the superintendent and how that can be a disaster. But one of the things that I took away from this, and I thought we might want to consider, is there's also a book that's called The Art of School Boarding that they were selling there, and it was pretty easy reading. And one of the things I used to do with my command staff and it was to have periodically, we would get a book and everybody would read it and we would go through it and discuss it. This book, I think, will be very good if we want to consider doing it to get everybody on the same page. It kind of reminds everybody about what we are in terms of the board. And the other classes or sessions that attended actually kind of followed off of this. So this became a foundation. One of the other things that I thought was very interesting, and Eric and I talked about this too, is they really talked about the code of conduct and how boards kind of forget about the code of conduct, and that really is what drives us. Is that we look at somehow about how we bring it into our conversations and bring it to the forefront for us and as well as the community. So the community can see what it is that guides us and what we're following. Eric and I came up, we talked about that perhaps at the beginning of our meetings, we could pick one code of conduct and read it. And if it's necessary, even discuss it. And there's 12 of them, so one a month would give us an ability to go through that. So I don't know, that's just some thoughts on that. I'm sure it might build off of it when he goes. So the next session I attended then was Every Voice Matters, engaging those we serve. So this became very interesting because it started talking about how we as a board should be engaging the community. And how do we reach out to the community and how do we hear from the community so that we can interact with them? And then it went through and talked about community engagement, nurturing a positive environment with the board and the community. Does the community, and this was, I thought, very interesting, does the community understand what the role of the school board is? And when they went through and talked about this, they realized the board's a volunteer position, that the public support of the community, promises to the community, education of the community. Board has to make decisions based on global interests. That I thought was very pertinent. But it goes through and starts talking about how this interaction with the community goes into other steps of what we should be talking about in terms of planning, strategic planning, 5-year planning, mission statement, vision statement. And they just kind of touched on those. And then what the main part of it was is this interaction, this dialogue that's got to be in place with the community. And then they talked about the entire community. and even the school community, with the staff, administration, the businesses, the boards, the mayor, the churches, everything, the whole community, so they know what we're doing and where we're going, and they understand it. And they talked about some of that in particular with, excuse me, what we're going through with this pandemic and how there would have been opportunities to get these interactions been in place prior to this, and looking to the future, how we would be able to deal with those. And the last thing that they said that I thought was very significant, the interaction is with the entire, emphasized entire community, as we acknowledge that every voice in our community matters. So then it flowed through, and the next session was setting district goals and directives. So looking at, there was a lot of dialogue that went through this, and they hit on things like helping people understand what the mission is and where we're trying to go. Everyone leaving their ego at the door and getting these three types of leadership in place with board-led, staff-led, or a combination of board and staff working as a team to get these goals and strategic planning discussions in place. They emphasize too that the school board association helps boards that are on that path. They're going to be moving in that direction. And again, emphasized these interactions with the entire community, getting the entire community involved. But it's what it ended up causing, and this is just something for us to reflect on. As I started thinking about it and came back and started looking, and it kind of turned the spotlight on things. And I asked the question and tried to find, where is our strategic plan? Where is our mission and vision statement? What are our goals as a board? And if these are already in place, then where are they? If I, as a board member, can't find them, how does the community find them? How does the community know? How do we show them what we're doing and where we're trying to go? So I think it's important for us to have a dialogue about that. Think about that. I ended up, and I don't mean to keep referring back to my past life in Wonderline and with the county, but both places started off with creating a mission statement, strategic plan. And I had 600 people working for me in the county. Had a $66 million budget and no strategic plan, no mission statement, no vision statement. So I ended up meeting with every single employee, all 600 employees, and we went out into the community in all 5 police districts and met with the community and put a strategic plan together. So it can't be done, and it makes a big difference because it became very clear to everybody, here's where we're at, here's where we're going, and here's how we plan to get there. And there's flexibility to make those changes. But anyway, I think that's something we might want to talk about. The last session was, does your board have a monitoring plan? So I thought it was very good because it talked about how do you monitor your strategic plan? How do you monitor your mission, where you're going, like who anticipated the pandemic was coming? And how do we monitor what we're going to be doing as a result of that pandemic? And then how do we plan ahead if the next pandemic is coming? But the question again was, if we don't have anything to monitor, what are we monitoring? So all of these things, I kind of looked at this, quite frankly, as there were a pile of pieces to a puzzle. So each one, the school boarding, the monitoring, the establishing the goals and objectives and the strategic plan and the every voice piece. And when you started putting these pieces together, it kind of gave a pretty clear picture, if you will, about what we should be thinking about, how we look and where we're going and how we're going to get there. So and it's no doubt embarking on this and going down that path is going to take some work and effort. But the first step is to agree to have a dialogue and look at it and consider it as a board, and see what we want to do. I attended all three of the general sessions. Mr. Joe Dombrowski was the PD educator you are. It was kind of funny and humorous, but he really had a message about how do we deal with kids. And the one thing that I thought was very appropriate was his comment that one size doesn't fit all, and how he's working and trying to educate and get all of his kids involved. And he was from a low-income community, so a lot of things he was talking about I thought were very interesting and very appropriate, if nothing else, to kind of open our eyes and thoughts about, you know, what is going on in our community and what we should be sensitive to. The second session was the privileged four that Kevin was talking about. And I kind of agree. It was like he was reading his whole presentation. But I did get what his point was. And I think what he was saying is, again, triggered a real thought process, because it's not an issue just in higher education. You know, as he pointed out, you can be smart. I can't remember exactly how he said it, but you can know calculus and you can know this and you can know that, but at the end of the day, you're still hungry. So how do we make sure that even though they're in these all these big universities and institutions of learning, but they have nowhere to sleep at night when school's done, they have nowhere to get their meal from. So it kind of was, I think, pertinent to society today, and things that even us, we should be aware of. The last one I thought was interesting too, was unconscious bias in education. And, you know, we talked about that even in law enforcement, this whole implicit bias where we all have these biases that we're not aware of. And there's things that we should be looking at to educate ourselves so that we are aware that we have these, we are aware that it happens. And if we're aware of it, it helps us get through them where we're not employing or being involved with these biases. And the biases basically are, you know, favoring somebody to a benefit or being prejudiced against somebody at a law. So it was very important to have these discussions, educating people, be aware of the unconscious actions and decisions that they make. So overall, I thought it was very good. I did a lot out of it. So I didn't mean to be going. That's why they call me Ramblin' Rose.
I can follow up then on Ray's. Ray and I went to I think most of the sessions together here. The first session on the art of school boarding was very beneficial as a new school board member for me. A lot of the things that I have been kind of thinking about as I've gotten started here were addressed in that presentation. And so it was kind of, for me, it was great to see the, you know, some of the not concerns, but things that I've been struggling with just as a new board member, getting my, you know, my feet wet here are common, you know, and they're things that, you know, new board members do experience. For me, the most beneficial thing I think was the responding to complaints. And I haven't had to manage that at all in this community. It's been really great. But just knowing that I've kind of got a toolbox for how to do that if it happens was really great. I agree too with the conduct, and I think being able to read those codes at the beginning of our meetings would be very beneficial and just helping make sure that all of our board members are practicing best practices all the time and, especially as we have turnover. The one thing that was a constant in all of these sessions, no matter what the topic was this focus on strategic planning, goal setting, and monitoring that. And, one thing that was really eye-opening to me was that I'm not very well versed on board policy and our monitoring plan and how we review that. For example, when we get the review in this previous board packet, it is pretty large. And I'm maybe not sure where I need to start on that and how to best review that so that I'm prepared for that. So that was eye-opening for me as well. Again, with the strategic planning, I can think back to a bunch of different times this year when we've talked about different goals and different plans, and I'm not sure if that is our strategic plan or if we have different goals for different things. For example, the shared services goals that we discussed. We've got our literacy goals and our restorative restart goals. And I'm not sure if that's what we're using as our strategic plan or if there's an additional plan in place that we're also following. So I saw that as a highlight and something that I could learn more about too. As far as the general sessions goes, I thought the privileged poor was a very good one for me. One of the things that really stood out to me was this idea of access versus inclusion. And I will admit, whenever I think about equity, my first thought is always that access piece to it. But hearing the Anthony Abram Jack present, he made it very clear that accessibility is only that first part of equity, and that inclusion really, ties it all together and makes equity, come to life. So that was really eye-opening for me.
Done?
Yeah.
Good, thank you, sir.
Alright, so I did Friday afternoon equity workshop. Christy and I did that together, so that was pretty cool. It's kind of neat to get everyone in the room, like from throughout the state, that's kind of working in the same thing that we are with equity. I thought it was, we had some eye-opening discussions and dialogue with some individuals there. Overall, I feel like it gave me a sense of clarity that we're doing the right thing. I guess, they gave us a pack, and I forgot to bring my packet too, but that was one of the ones that I read through front to back, and they said that starting equity work, one of the first things that they recommended doing an audit, which is, and I know that was a hot topic, I think, the last board meeting and the one before, and just kind of, what are we doing? Is it the right thing to do? What's that gonna entail? So just kind of seeing that from a bigger perspective, and the presenters, showing that is one of those steps. Again, it was kind of reassuring, I guess that's the word I was looking for. Equity work is ongoing and that doesn't stop. So whenever we get to that policy and, you guys start implementing it as the administration, it doesn't stop, right? It's going to be ongoing, and it's something that we have to, revisit all the time. One of the things that Ray was touching on that they said they're allowed to is soliciting the community input. I think we're doing that, right? Obviously, our committee is comprised of community members, so that's important to make sure that we do have that. Like I said, overall, I just thought it was refreshing to see that we're not the only ones working on it. It's a hot topic. I understand that, but it was kind of nice to get all those people in one room and just kind of bouncing ideas off of each other.
We had a very entertaining table meet.
Yes, we did.
Wanted to start a fight with
With
the
the moderator,
leader.
yeah, one of the moderators, yeah.
Grabbed the mic and
Oh,
took off. It was fun.
interesting. She had to be at our table, right? The second general session with Anthony Jack, I get from I guess, as I started listening, it hit home for me more personally, because I have a lot of nieces and nephews that are in that stage of their life where they're going to college and higher education. And similar to what Eric said, is that access isn't inclusion. And it just, so I looked at it more from that perspective. I just wanted to throw that out there again, less from a board perspective, more from like, it is eye-opening that as my nieces and nephews, like, this is what they're dealing with, right? Because they're people of color and it's a little bit different for them, you know, it's just, that's the way it is, right? So they're gonna have different challenges that other individuals are gonna have. So those are some of the conversations that with me as a, you know, adult to them and as an uncle, you know, I gotta have with them and help them try to navigate that. So I thought from that perspective, it was good for me. Saturday, after the general session, I did the collective bargaining trends. That was key for me, obviously being on the bargaining committee, just a couple things that I took out from it. You know, having done other negotiations, learning the lingo is important, like learning the language. I will say the panel was super experienced, tons and tons and tons of years of negotiating and bargaining these types of contracts. Again, this is my first educational one, so really just making sure I, you know, learning the lingo, which was very beneficial leading up to it. We did our you know, preparation sessions. I think that was very helpful. Understanding that bargaining is going to be adversarial. I mean, that's just the way it's going to be, no matter how good you think it can go. At the end of the day, you have two groups that want two different things, right? So it's negotiating, you got to meet somewhere in the middle. Some of the current trends, you know, shorter contracts due to COVID. And that's one of the things we've discussed, obviously internally. CARES Act money is going to be expiring soon, so that was something that was mentioned. And then just understanding that unions have a little bit more problem with the labor shortage too. So that's something we got to understand and you know, eventually might come up. The worst one I went to, just to piggyback off of Kevin, I went to a facilities one just to see, it was lessons of the pandemic for building maintenance and care. I think the content was okay. It was just the presentation itself was just very monotonous and they were reading straight off of what was up there. I guess from this perspective, just making sure we have an, you know, a plan. I know we talked about strategic plan from the actual, grades and, literacy and things of that nature, but having a plan for our facilities, right? I mean, I know we don't have the newest, best, biggest buildings, but making sure we have a plan long-term. $50 billion a year spent on school renovations, modernizations, and construction. That's a big number. I didn't think it was that big. I knew it was a lot, but 50 billion a year is pretty big. And then the last one that I went to, I couldn't hear hardly anything. And I know you guys didn't mention it because we were having a hard time, like we were all the way in the back. It was the no weak links, the intra-board relationship and whatnot. So they didn't have a mic at the beginning. It was just, so I went based off of what I saw up on the board. So from this perspective, I looked at it as I was reading what was up there and the little bit that I could hear. I looked at it more from, I went back to, I've only been a board member for 18 months, right? And it was just kind of like spur of the moment, like, hey, I got, elected, not elected, but interviewed and I was chosen for the position and then reelected. But a couple things that I took away, some that I feel that we're doing, some that I feel that I think we can improve on. Utilize expertise of individual board members. Yes, we're all one of seven, but we can all learn from one another. Everyone has a different lens to look at certain situations. I think we do a good job of that, to be very honest with you. We all have different strengths and I won't call them weaknesses, just a different perspective, right? I'm in facilities, you're an attorney. So everyone's a little different, right? And they look at things through that lens. So I think we do a really good job of that. But a couple things that I think from my perspective, again, this is just me, the reliance of expert knowledge from our superintendent and administration. I feel like we can all do a little bit better on that end. And then striking the right balance is important. Micromanaging can lead to the rise of conflict and distraction. And I know, Ray, in one of your sessions, you mentioned that in your notes and I wrote it down and circled that because it coincides with that. So, and I know it's a fine line. We're a board. Obviously, superintendent reports to us and we're here to manage that. But I think there's a fine line. And I look at it from any other perspective. Micromanaging employees, I feel like it just drags them down and it's just not good for the individual. So I kind of try to bring that, here. So that was it for me.
Thanks for sharing.
Okay, so I'm left. So I went to the first day, the Friday, the morning and the afternoon session. So I met up with Friday for the afternoon one. We just happened to meet, we definitely worked out. But the morning session I went to was Bridging What Divides Us with Jim Bolton. And that was, I felt like it it was very helpful. It was nice to hear some of the different pieces as they went through, and it was sort of a good reminder. A lot of it went through a lot of this, I wrote down that it's very similar to my mediation training that I've gone through and stuff going, listening, attending and reflecting, that you don't have to agree to listen and reflect. You don't have, so a lot of it was dealing with the theme that we heard from all of the board member things with, how lots of districts are hearing from lots of complaining individuals and are dealing with a lot of that this year or last couple years. So that was sort of the perspective they were coming at, saying that, you don't have to agree, but reflecting, allows you to set the framework and comfort zones and a lot of this. One thing I thought was interesting is that when you are when you're triggered in the fight or flight part of your I don't know, there was a lot of neuroscience stuff that was discussed, but that you lose essentially like 30 IQ points when your fight or flight is triggered. And that's helpful to think about, because sometimes we have a tendency to just think, oh, well, they don't know what they're talking about. But it's when people are angry, and that can happen in any variety of contexts, but it's helpful to think and take a step back and realize that, these people are passionate or angry about a particular issue, and that, that the reactions need to be tempered on both sides. And when we all get angry, sometimes we're not our best selves thinking. So I thought that was interesting. One of the takeaways though, because we did have, it was at tables, and so you had a lot of smaller group stuff that you were doing as part of it. They were talking, I can't remember how it came up, but one of the things that I pointed at that I remember thinking when they were talking about how to address some of these problems. And I wrote down thinking that one of the problems though is that the public comment, knowing that it's not a dialogue, it's not an interaction, but that sometimes when there are contentious issues tends to lead to more frustration on their part because there can't be a dialogue and that's not the appropriate time for that. And that tends to then further frustrate and then further enhance the divide between, us and them or the community, because then they feel like we're not addressing it or whatever. And that's when, when people are most angry is when they come to a meeting or they come on because they have something to share, but then they can't get their question answered or get that, because it's not a town hall, it's reflecting that. But one thing, one of the members, another board member sitting at my table from District 61, and I can't remember where that is, but I can look that up. But he mentioned that years ago, they implemented something interesting that I think we should look into and find out how other boards maybe are doing it and consider it. It doesn't have to be an immediate thing. They have, as part of their normal template of their agenda for every meeting, after their public comment, which they start with and they do first, they also have a board comment section that is not designed to be a direct response, and it doesn't have to be everybody talk. It's a position that is there some issue that anybody on the board would like to just generally address. He says sometimes that has been helpful at their boards, especially when they know there are contentious issues, that can allow not to speak to a particular person who spoke and to answer their questions or whatever, but to allow them to understand they've been heard. And that this is something that is important to all of us, some, whatever, and to go into it. He said sometimes it can be as simple as, especially during the pandemic and stuff, where, some of the people saying, hey, I really want to commend, I've been listening to some of this, some of the teachers are doing an amazing job, just an opportunity to just make a little statement. And if sometimes nobody has a statement, and that's like we have here, sometimes there's no public comment because no one shows up, and that's okay. But I thought that was an interesting take that I would like us to look into. Obviously, we have to talk and make sure, because I understand there would definitely be a fine line, and you don't want to get into violating the open, and responding and commenting, and certainly not engaging in argument or anything. But I thought that was an interesting approach that I would like to look into more, because I felt like the times where there have been super contentious issues and a lot of people coming, I felt like that may be a way, just by making a general statement, that we can dial down. Or if we know there's a contentious issue that may not be on the agenda, it's a way to say, I thank you for coming and bringing that to our attention. We will look into this for, just something general that I would like to put this. And I know we do the president's prerogative, so where we can have an opportunity to comment, but seeing as though that's the last thing on our list, nobody's watching or attending at that point, to know that we had that discussion and that we did hear what they said. And yes, I would like that to be on an agenda in the future or something.
Christie, did they talk at all about allowing public comment at different times in the meeting? Because I think, I forget who I talked to, but we were talking about if somebody has a public comment, it's usually going back a month on something maybe they heard the last meeting or something they heard is coming up. But then the board meeting usually addresses maybe that topic. So then they might want to have a different statement, or just, having more immediate access to what the board is reviewing and then reflecting on it and then commenting on it. I
That
don't
didn't
know.
come up here because that just wasn't the context. And this actually wasn't even part of this particular session. It
Oh,
was
this
something
a
that took place
sidebar. Yeah, okay.
at another board member who was at when we were discussing the general concept of addressing angry people. And that was, so it was just a takeaway that I wanted to bring back and have us at least explore and discuss. And if no one agrees, that's fine too. But I like that idea. Again, we'd have to have rules and stuff. It wouldn't be an automatic thing. But I thought that could be something, especially if we know, because sometimes we know there are hot button issues that are coming up that just aren't on today's agenda. And in order to be able to, just a general comment that if we felt one is needed, and again, there may be some times where no one has a comment, okay, moving on, and that's fine. And it could be for, like we say, blows and grows, right? I mean, it could be a chance for us to commend and, thank the staff or just generally give a positive comment too, rather than just sticking, to the other, I don't know, just an interesting thought. The
Wait, can I
equity,
ask a clarifying
yeah,
question? I thought when you first started saying, I thought you said that they did it at the end of the meeting, but then you said
no, after
president's
the.
prerogative is at the end of the meeting. After when?
No, so they did the board so they do their public comment, and then before we start the business meeting, they do, does
Okay,
anyone have
got
any
it.
comments from the board
Got it.
before we move on to the rest of the meeting?
Okay, got it.
And I was contrasting that with, I know we do the president's prerogative at the end.
Yeah.
But that doesn't always address some of those concerns if they're not here to
Mhm.
hear that we heard what they said, and yeah, I'd like that to put on the agenda, or sometime if that could be done. I don't know, so it was just a thought. Then the afternoon workshop, the equity issue. We heard more about, and the packet did discuss more about the equity audit being an advisable step as part of the community. So I will say too, that helped me understand a little more about how that fits into the goals that we are trying to do as a district with the committees and the board committee, and not only the district committee, and dealing with that. So I think that was helpful. I like that one of the things that I wrote down from that was the continuum of colorblind versus color conscious versus color brave. So there was a different, I thought that was a helpful continuum to talk about that, when people are talking about, well, we're colorblind, well, no, we need to be color conscious, but we could also strive to be color brave in dealing with that, and how to deal with that. I felt like that was helpful. And I think that there was a lot of discussion in a lot of the other workshops where equity was a topic of discussion, comment. So again, helped. I'm glad to see that we're taking steps in our district. The general sessions, the first one, I definitely found him to be engaging, and he was funny, and as an educator, I think he had since there are a lot of educators there too, not just board members. I felt like that was nice to hear some unique ways that he was addressing things when I don't know that he's teaching now, but when he was doing it, and because they didn't have big fun. I thought it was interesting though, that he basically advocated for pushing the envelope against your admins because of certain things, and how he used social media in great strides, which made his admins very nervous. But I felt like that was engaging. I liked the topic, and I was a little disappointed in the privileged poor one, because I think I was expecting it to be more engaging and applicable, I guess, to K through 12 districts, where I felt like he really was talking about higher education. And while not irrelevant to what we're doing, I was trying to figure out how all of that really tied back into like what we could take with it. I also found I was the first in my family to go to college, and while I am not a person of color, we did not have money, and there were a lot of things that rang true with not realizing that, spring break closes down, like they kick you out of the dorms. You can't stay there and you have to then find a place to go and have to afford you can't just stay there. All of the, dining halls shut down and things like that, which brings back to, making sure that we can
Yeah,
feed.
and I think it sounds like was he talking to very specific instances? Because if with a broad brush,
I
I mean,
think
I know some places that's not true, what you
Right.
just said.
I
So
think-
what was his?
his
I guess.
his role is more, he's a professor, and so his role is more in higher education, so I think that's more his niche, and so he was speaking to that. And I think a lot of the schools do, maybe some are changing that, and that was
Yeah,
some
okay,
things,
yeah.
but I think generally speaking, that's kind of what happens, and having experienced it on this side of a,
Yeah, okay.
and that's where I did find interesting talking about access as part of it, but you also have to get to the inclusion part, because just getting you to the college, but not giving you a way to meaningfully
Yeah.
participate if you can't, if you only get, so many meals per week, well, that's not all your meals, so how are you making up the rest of them? And, making sure that's fine. I could draw that context to the efforts that we were making and do make, like during the summer and during winter break, trying to send bagged lunches, and we do have, organizations we're putting together to try to help meet the needs of those that need that in our district. So I did, I guess, again, reassured by some of the stuff that we're doing and making sure that we're continuing with that. Let's see, a lot of my time was spent at the delegate assembly. Do you want me to go into that now, or do you want to go to that in a little bit?
It's next on the list.
I mean, I can just do it since we're here. So there were technical difficulties because initially they had everybody download an app ahead of time, but of course not everyone did it ahead of time like they were supposed to. So when you walked up and you registered, they gave you a packet, but if there were a number of people who had pre-registered that they did not have their packet, so then they were gonna have to go back and do it by hand and not have it counted. It was gonna be this whole thing. They ended up scrapping that, creating a whole new login so that everybody could get in, and I don't know why they didn't just do that to begin with. So that took a while to work out. Once you get started, then on each topic, first they did the whole Robert's Rules of Order, and they were very particular about it, made it seem like it was a lot more than just a suggestion, but anyway. Then you had each of the districts who put forth all of the resolutions had a person get up, and a lot of them came from the same district, so they heard a lot from the same people. Going through all of this. Now, there had been 2 different webinars in advance that delegates could participate in, so we could hear all about it here. So, a lot of it was hearing the same things over and over again, those of us that did it. Then there was debate on each of them, and we went through and did that. Some of them were pulled out of the consent agenda, kind of like what we do here, so that we had to go on each one and going through it. More or less because we had decided here, with the exception of whatever number it was that had to do with the gun laws, we had decided to follow all the recommendations of the resolution committee. So that was fairly easy. All of them essentially passed, with the exception of the one on the gun. The resolution committee had recommended to approve it because it was fitting the need of that rural community and leaving it up to control, and we had decided to go against that. It did not pass. However, interesting to note, listening to a lot of the comments and the people that spoke, and then the chatter around afterward, it was, and this is where my notes are at home, and I could give you the exact number of how many voted, I don't remember. It was a lot closer to it not passing than it was the last time, which leads me to believe, because this keeps coming back every year, I feel like they're getting closer and it will happen. I will say, as I discussed before at the last meeting, if they got to a point of making it specific to rural districts who have already tried X, Y, and Z, and have the resources, try to hire this, cannot keep this, if they made it a little more specific that it was only applicable to those rural districts, I think a lot more of us would get on board and say, we want to give you tools in your toolbox. I'm just scared of it then being used at the next community over, and then being a slippery slope, and then being a whole thing. I get the point and why these rural districts need it. And if the resolution was a little bit more narrowly tailored, I think it would pass. So just a key for down the road. I think we're getting closer to it happening. We'll see. The other one that was a little surprising to me that did not pass, that the resolution committee had recommended to adopt, and I had voted to adopt it, was the one about advocating for a childcare reimbursement for school board members. People were very strong about that, that when you apply for this, that there's no pay and that, we all did it and you should have to do it too. People were very angry. It was weird.
Give me a break.
We already agreed, not, the resolution committee already said, don't pay school board members, but goodness, we can't even have a childcare reimbursement. And everyone's thinking like, do you understand the cost of this is so low? And then you might actually, because there are a lot of school boards who can't get enough people to sit on the board because of the constraints, but okay, no, we can't possibly reimburse that. Anyway, so that was an interesting dialogue. For the most part, all the rest of them passed as recommended, as we all did. So there were not really any other noteworthy things for me to bring back other than those two. It just took a long time. And therefore I missed a lot of some of the the sessions that I really would have liked to attend, but I was sitting there, but that's okay. I did pop into some of the popular ones that were discussed, but like the legally stumped and a bunch of different of the board member ones, but honestly, the ones that I wanted to attend were super packed, super full, there was nowhere to sit. And you couldn't hear a lot, so I ended up popping around like, Dr. Myers had said, yeah, feel free to pop around to a few. So I did that. And I figured I could look at some of the handouts online. So that part was not as entertaining. One of the ones that I did end up attending, that I did find interesting, kind of not knowing where we're going to be, what the recommendation is going to be down the road for facilities, and if we have to at some point put forth a referendum and doing that. Lake Villa had talked about, they put on a one about the second chance because they had a referendum go through, it failed, they kind of regrouped, they did it again, and then it passed the next time. So they were talking about some of the things they learned and what they did. And one of the things that they basically said was, I know that they talk about the board members kind of taking a backseat and letting the admin do all of the advocacy and do that with the community. They said we sort of did that the opposite because it didn't work the first time and we needed a little bit more PR sort of. So they did hold a lot more town halls. They did get the board members doing working with the administration to do a little bit more of that PR work, essentially out into the community, making people understand some of those pieces. They did end up tailoring it down and cutting down a lot, so it wasn't as large the second time as it was the first time, and I think that helped. But they had used an outside firm who essentially came in and tried to do a whole thing, but because they listened to them the first time and it didn't work, they kind of got rid of them, retooled, and did a little more of that. So I thought that was interesting to hear and to see how that worked. They have, I think it was 5 different schools they were working with trying to fix, and they ended up scrapping it for one and I think closing one or whatever. So there were some different challenges, but I thought that was interesting just to keep in mind. I also know the president of that board, so should it ever come up, I have a resource to reach out to. But I also, the one on Sunday morning, I guess before that, I also went to the board policy on the Press 108. And as Eric said, now first thing to know is this is the historically largest ever, so that they're not all this large and overwhelming. Just so you know. And because it was so big, as you'll hear, we did not put that on today's thing because there's lots of pieces and things that need to be looked through, and we're going to bring that back in January. But they did kind of walk us through a lot of those pieces, and then I know we watched the webinar on that as well. But so I spent some time with that and learned a little bit more about the press, because while I've read these press memos on many occasions, this is my first year on the committee with Lisa. So I have not been actively involved in the actual press piece, and because we do subscribe to Press Plus, that is helpful. Where a couple of years ago we didn't, so that was a good decision we made as a district, which helps us a lot in keeping a lot of that together. So I felt like that was helpful. And then the third general session, I thought that she was a good dynamic speaker as well. I enjoyed that about the unconscious bias and implicit bias. I'm trying to think of specific examples to bring back, but I felt like that was, again, kind of tying it all in with the equity and the equity work that we're doing and trying to pull it together. So I thought that was good.
Sure.
Pieces to say.
So what I heard and wanting to get direction from you, here's some things I heard you say that were of interest, right? For you as a board, and some of this you would need for us to pull or work on to bring back to you. One thing I heard minimally for us right now from an administrative side, I want to see what we'd have to be able to clearly show what is our long-term plans that we have in place. Because we certainly do have items in place, but the one thing that it hit me is you guys are sharing what you heard from the board retreat was we need to get it more in a one-page document. Let's start there and then be able to say, okay, what's next? Because the one thing right now we have, our focus has been on literacy, and that's been it for 3 years. So we do need to start branching out what's next. I think one of the parts was not only on the academic side of it, but what's our long-term plan? Freddie, you brought it up, the facility. We have that, but it's not anything that we've been bringing forward yet because just it hasn't been come to the forefront yet. So that's one. Two is I heard suggestion about the art of school boarding. We actually do have a couple of those copies. So if that's something the board would like to entertain, we can certainly purchase those books. And if we want to do a book read or something, I just need you as a board to say, yes, that's what we'd want to do. And then following that up, the 12 different board conducts. If that's something that you want to incorporate as part of your board meetings, we just need to know so that we could just get those selected then or get them pulled and then make space on our agenda to be able to do that. We're starting off the meeting. The next one is, note for me. Christy or Freddie, would you share with me the packet you got from that equity conference you went to session, please, so I can read it too? Long-term building plan, and then following up on with District 71 about the board comment section was the other part I heard about seeing it's something in that we can maybe incorporate there. So that's what I heard were things coming out of sharing more interest. So A, did I capture what you brought forward? B, what do you want me to do with those, or what do you want to do with those as a board? I can bring those back to you so you can all see them again. So I mean, because it's all verbal, I get that, but so here's what I'll suggest. I'll summarize what I heard. I'll provide it to everybody in a Friday update so that you have it. And then I guess what I'd like to know is I would want direction from you as a board on what to do with those. Mr. Rose.
Can I clarify something?
You may.
So when I'm talking and what the discussions were centered on the board
Mhm.
and the board establishing goals for the board,
Mhm.
the strategic plan for the board, there was no intention that any of that gets pushed over to administration and creates more work for administration. Those strategic plan, mission statement, and whatever is being done would be 7 people that are sitting here doing that work.
Mhm.
Okay. I just wanna make
Yes,
sure.
no, I appreciate you clarifying. My intention would be, Eric, you described it probably best. We've got a number of things that we're doing.
Right.
We're with what we set up. What I'd want to be able to do, and I put down here, do something like a 1 or 2 page summary. Here are the key things that we're doing and breaking them down by year, kind of the timeline.
Yeah.
So that you can at least see, here's what we're working on, the time frame, and then be able to say, how are we measuring them? So then, okay, then you at least have that, and then when it comes to the board, you want to develop a strategic plan longer, you at least got that background to go from.
The big picture.
Yes,
Do we have a plan on a page, or that phrase sticks in my mind on the website somewhere, or did we used to have a plan on a page, or?
the high school
The high
used to
school.
have a plan on the page.
Oh, okay, maybe that's what I thought.
Yeah,
Is that what you're talking?
Yeah. so we could do that, so then you have something to work.
Good.
Yeah. We went through the delegate selections. The last one is, want to go over anything with 108? You kind of hit on a little bit, Chrissy, but is there anything you want to highlight from there? Or we want to bring it back January 12th?
So I was
What?
prepared just to let everybody know what the big bucket topics were. Now, each of those have subparts.
Lots of some parts.
Yeah, lots of subparts. So can you hear me okay? Am I?
Yep.
Okay. So actually, so they're calling them bundles. So one of the most detailed ones that will have to do a lot of discussion, and I think it was flagged for legal review as well, was curriculum and sex education changes. Then there's another bucket of ethics, training, and educator misconduct, student attendance, health and safety issues, the Open Meetings Act, holidays and leaves, school counselor terminology, student data privacy and rights, what they're calling miscellaneous, and then the usual 5-year review updates. So those are the ones that are just slated for 5-year review, but the others are all basically being driven by legislative changes and things like that.
Right on.
All right, and so if anybody has any questions, I've got the presentation that we saw, Christy and I saw, but basically those are the big bucket topics. And then that whole massive, the first document is a shorter, it's called a memo, that gives the nice summary.
Shorter.
And then there's our output, which redlines and highlights what our policies would be, impacted by the changes. And then there's a number where we have choices, so we'll want to discuss the choices. And in the past, Christy, we would come back with a recommendation. But we'd also probably have some sort of discussion with Dr. Myers, so there's a common understanding of what those choices mean.
Right, well, we have a meeting scheduled, you and I and Dr. Myers in January to go through some of those answers once the attorney has been consulted and for him to report first the various administrators who are in charge of some of those buckets that would not be necessarily, I mean, they will be board things that we will bring to you guys as part of the recommendations, but some of them are actual board decisions that we have to decide, do we want to change a policy, do this, or take, go down which road? We will bring those to you, I think, at the next meeting with, here are our recommendations. But everybody is able and welcome to read if you have a particular interest in any of these topics that are in there. Otherwise, we will bring the recommendations to you. It's just too big of a bite for us to get through and get the answers for the first read, because we do a first read and then a second read before we adopt it. And then it gets, once we adopt it and pass it, whatever we've done, then that gets incorporated into the policies through Press Plus and on his work. So
So a lot of this is in motion. Dr. Myers has kicked off the feedback from his administrative staff as well as legal counsel. We're going to be reviewing it, and we're kind of, so
we will collaborate and then come back to the next meeting with here are recommendations for how we should move forward. And then so you'll have an opportunity to read those and decide if you agree or if you disagree. We'll have discussion and vote. But it's
yeah. And there's just, again, under each bucket topic, there's sometimes 3, 4, 5 different things, so.
And they highlighted in the webinar and
Yeah.
at the thing that I did at the ISB, how some of the legislative actions that have taken place make it clear that the left side hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing, and some are in conflict, and some of the attorneys don't yet know. So they were like,
Yeah,
talk to your attorney and see what your attorney says, because we're guessing on some of these. So should be fun.
Can I throw something out there just to kind of upset everybody? So right now, the committee, the policy committee is made up of 2 people that are gonna review 175 policies. Has there ever been any thought that the entire board become the policy and each member of the board take like 20, 25 policies? And you're responsible for those policies and you do the review on them, and then instead of 2 people trying to report back and digest and then represent all this, that's being done as the
I
board.
think the reason it works in the past because the volume is so much smaller.
It's not usually this big.
So it's not usually this big, so.
Just this one happens to be.
This one happens to be unusually large because of a bunch of legislative changes and then going through. And a lot of them are not gonna require us to spend a lot of time and detail, because some of them are just, they're updates based on legislative changes, and we just need to make sure the policies match the actual laws.
Yeah,
So
other
some of them are
footnotes
not
and
really-
references, yeah.
the ones that will require choices from us, we will have, I mean, the discussion will be limited to those issues. We're not really gonna be
Right
spending
now, we're
lots of.
doing every 5 years, we're reviewing those. And if we look at what that topic was that I talked about, what is the monitoring plan for the board? We would be able to have, T and I had a discussion about this, like with the finance committee. The finance committee having a dialogue and looking at the policies that pertain to finance, so that the finance committee actually does the
Yeah, that
work
makes
of looking at, instead of waiting 5 years, we have a better handle on what those policies look like. And I'm gonna bring it up again. Remember I talked about the mentoring? When new board members come on, what's in place so that there's more of a welcoming environment, and what do we do to help new people that are coming in? And there was a policy that's there. And when I was looking through some of this, there's another sentence in the policy that puts it on the president. Doesn't say he has to, but says that he shall or could, I can't remember exactly what the word was, assign a veteran board member to mentor new, so there's 2 or 3 different places in the policies, the 175 policies, that is addressing that issue. And I gotta tell you, I'm like really sensitive about that. And what we do as a board, and I know it's gonna be a while again before that happens, but that's just one example of how we should be monitoring what's going on with policies, and are we up to date with them? And are we keeping track of what should be changing, especially what we just went through with this pandemic? Are we on board? Is the board on board with what's happening and
So I think that's a good point. I think that could be a very practical solution is having, like you said, a task force or a board member actively working on the new board member onboarding. I think we would love that help. Because I know we talked about it a few meetings ago and said, yes, we'll look at it, but we don't, we need help, yeah. So that would be a way of chunking out specific topics. So we have 2 now. We have the finance that we're kind of saying, aside from the regular press process, we're gonna look at finance policies. And now we're gonna look on the board onboarding process, and we've got a little bit of time, so we have the leisure to do that. So maybe for that one, a new board member partners with an experienced board member, because I mean, Chrissy and I are only ourselves going on 2.5 years. So that would be my suggestion, I think. And then as you guys hear about or read the packets, if something else jumps out, that, I think that's a good way of chunking out our needs based on like what you just said.
But if I can offer, because I think that's not unhelpful, but I think that's a kind of a different piece from the press policy implementation piece of it.
Yeah,
I think that's more of a,
but it's proactive.
it is, no, and I don't
Yeah.
disagree with that concept. I'm trying to figure out a way, because I don't know. All
It's
7
just
people
something
did
that
not
you have
sign
a
up for the
dialogue
policy
about.
committee, so I don't know that, if we assign everybody one without their permission or
Yeah.
involvement, that, it's not gonna get done. But you're not wrong that maybe we need to chunk out the pieces for, more
just suggesting,
implementation
yeah.
of, as a board. I don't know. I'm not sure what the
Just have
terminology
to
should
take
be,
a
but
look at some of this. and
Yeah.
Maybe kind of refresh how we're doing with it.
I think that's different from the actual
Like
implementing
the
the press
ones that
policy.
have to do with curriculum and education. Maybe that's a natural opportunity for educators on the board to get involved. And like, then one of us could meet with you and say, you know, so we don't have to call a special meeting, and then we get your input. You know, if there's something about security and safety, then that's naturally, Ray is gonna partner
Facilities or
with you.
whatever. Right,
And then facilities, maybe, you know, whatever your interest is, if Al or Freddie wanna delve into whatever,
Because you're not wrong. I
student
mean,
data and privacy, then yes, we could assign that to you. And then we be the leads and kind of coordinate the feedback.
well, because you're not wrong that I mean, the policies that are in place govern us whether or not we know what they are. And that's more of a different issue. That's why I'm saying that's kind of
Yeah.
separate from the making sure the policies are on the website in their form and that we've identified precedent and passed it. That's a matter of making sure as to the board are educated on what our policies are.
Yeah.
And I think that dividing those up and just saying, hey, you know, maybe we have like a board education or board, you know, like a segment of each meeting where we're like, okay, and we kind of go around and rotate it through so that it's not everybody doing it all the time.
We're gonna just
Right.
review what.
Taking your feedback about the code of conduct and making sure we refresh it each time. Maybe we set aside part of each meeting to kind of go through and educate everybody and make sure that, you know, that, okay, we're gonna focus this month on these couple of policies or whatever, the
Right.
section. And maybe there's nothing in there that needs to be focused on, but maybe we can chunk it out to do that, more of an education piece of it, separate and apart from the implementation of the policies themselves. I don't know what the right words are.
Yes, I think you're right.
I think the more interaction and engagement we have with the policy is just gonna lead to greater understanding and
Right.
compliance.
So I'm not disagreeing with you at all. I'm just saying, I think that that's separate and apart from the,
Yeah, Just,
hey, we agree with this red line, we don't agree with this, like, that's a different, you
right,
know.
yeah, no,
And they're all, when we do this, they're all in, when they come through, we put them all in the packet. So anybody who is interested in gearing up and reading them all, and they're all on the website, anybody can read them all the time, but I fear that assigning people things that we may be losing.
So can we say this? Are there any volunteers? Now that you've seen the packet and the list and our little summary, is there anybody that wants to help this go around? And it won't be held against you if you say no. Because maybe you're involved with finance and negotiations or, you know, whatever. So
I mean, I would definitely love an opportunity just to learn more about it, and engage more with it.
what does? How about this? How about tonight or tomorrow, I'll send the overview we got. You all can look at the different topics and they're listed, you know, what the policy numbers are. And then you can give Christy and I feedback and say, you know what, I really want to delve into data security and data privacy or something like that.
But to be clear, you use Lisa as your point of contact because you can't write emails.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. You're right.
I'm
Yeah,
just-
right. One or, yeah, send it to me. That's fine.
I'm acting in Will's stead since he's
You're
not
right.
here anymore. I'm just reminding everybody
You did a
again,
good
like on
job
the text
of
message
keeping
that,
us
you know,
honest
just,
about it.
Yep, so once we go to 3, then it's a board meeting.
right. So we don't want emails with 3 of us. So you,
I thought it would be
Lisa
a
will
one-way
communicate it to me
communication.
and
Yeah.
forward it, and that's fine. But that way we don't have,
Yeah, why
Too
don't
many
we do that?
documents.
And then if anybody wants to jump in this go around, they can jump in and you can see the different topics. One might strike you as interesting and grab your fancy. And then when we get together, I'll put in what the deadline is for our meeting basically with Dr. Meyer. So then we'll have your feedback by then. It'll take a burden off of us.
Sounds fun.
But then-
And it'll serve the purpose of just getting people familiar with the process and the way things are phrased and all that.
and then we could try to think about how this is where it comes back with, I think, in the Friday update that Dr. Myers is gonna give us about what he heard tonight. Maybe there's a way for us to think about it further and change our agenda template for future meetings to say, we're going to start adding this, we're gonna start doing this so that that becomes the implementation, and maybe we have like a policy education moment or something where we go through each time, and then maybe we do at that point create a schedule over the course of the year or so to assign some pieces out to it, and maybe we don't get through all of it in a year, maybe we start and it's an ongoing process and we see how long that takes, because that obviously adds to the meeting. But I don't disagree that that's probably an important addition to help everybody on
Handbook
board.
is grouped by topics, so it makes,
seven of
there's a
them.
logic to.
Mhm.
So I agree, think about it a little bit more. The thing that hits me, at least structurally, if we wanted to do, if the board wanted to do something like this, could set it up to where how you have it structured for the press. Anybody else interested in picking a certain topic to support the committee, go ahead and do that. Then the months that we don't have a press review, look at doing something. If you want to go by each section, say, okay, this month, if everybody wants to look in section 1, if there's a board topic or policy in there that interests you, that you want to bring up for discussion, we'll do that during maybe the committee time for policies. Because there's a natural spot there, right? So I mean, that's just a
Right.
format, because that way the net creates that opportunity. You're talking about policies that aren't necessarily being reviewed that year or the next 4 years. And it's just, it creates that dialogue that we all learn something. I understand it completely, because I've been, even for myself, every time I go into the board policy, I find something in the policy I didn't see before. I'm like, oh, that's something we gotta do, or something we haven't done. So it's always good to refresh. Okay. That is it for the open session, sir.
Okay, next on the agenda is committee updates. Do we have anything else for board policy? I think we talked about it quite a bit. And you're gonna send something out, Lisa?
Yep. Probably,
Okay. And then the next one is finance advisory.
We haven't met. We had welcome date for December, and there was a negotiation conflict with TNI or personal schedule, so we're gonna try to shoot for January.
Then next on the agenda is representative updates, STEAM Foundation.
I can report, we had the STEAM Foundation fundraiser, since we couldn't do pizza throwdown or night at the races this year. They did the virtual fundraiser, which was again, the second year of doing a virtual one, bingo online. That was Sunday. They ended up raising about $5,000. So they called that a success. They had, some sponsors who did a little more than they used to, a lot that did less, but they did get a number of raffles and put them together. They sold raffle tickets, and we did bingo, and of the 7 bingo games, my mother won 1 and my son won 2. And they had 12 different raffles where they sold raffle tickets, and we did that, and Holly Kim and I picked them on camera and did that, and my family got a lot of them, and Lisa's family got some. My family's very happy. They get to do a tour of the police station and some other things. So it was, it was nice, and we will hope that next year we'll be able to do something a little more in-person interactive, but we'll have to see how things go and how it goes. There were some technical glitches at the beginning, but all in all, we raised $5,000. So not a bad go of it.
Next is CEDAW.
Okay, I attended the governing board meeting on December 1st. We approved 2 MOUs, one for the teachers union and one for the support staff association. Both were very similar. They addressed the attendance bonus, which is being suspended for the current year due to attendance being impacted by COVID. In place of that, they have put in retention and recognition bonus and a planning and preparation bonus. Along with that, just as we saw from our report card, evaluations are being waived, and some of the designations are being waived again this year for all non-probationary staff. They also talked about staffing and enrollment. As staffing continues to be an issue, they have started to put enrollment caps in place. Just to ensure that they can maintain the least restrictive environment, to make sure that the learning environment is still safe and meaningful. They did a strategic plan update. They have 3 areas that they're focusing on. That's climate and culture, student instruction, and social and emotional wellness. The next governing board meeting is on March 2nd, so I will have even more to report at the next one. I will continue to report on the exec board summaries that I get in the meantime. There is some mention of CEDAW in the media as they are managing a former employee who's been criminally charged. So you may see that in the news. And there'll be more information on that as it becomes public.
On the bonuses, what were the types they were doing?
So there was an attendance bonus that's being suspended and it's being replaced with a retention and recognition bonus and also a planning and preparation bonus.
So on the retention, are there things associated with that? Like if you stay for this long, you get that?
Yeah, as long as you're,
All of them have some sort of criteria associated?
Yeah,
with
as
it?
long as you're maintain some status of being hired at certain dates, you're gonna get that bonus. I think there are 2 different dates that they'll measure that by. As long as you're employed on those dates, you're gonna get the bonus. And that's it.
Good, thank you. Next up is community outreach, village liaison.
Last Friday was the Mundelein United Leadership, and I was not able to make that meeting, but I don't know, Jamie, were you? Oh,
I heard
sorry.
it was great. I talked to a few people that said
Oh, right. Would you mind taking my place?
We continued to talk about the topics of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We looked at the different organizations, the Village of Mundelein, District 75, District 120, the police organization, the fire department, and it was presented the equity work that they've already done and the progress that they have made. Then we, in breakout sessions, discussed next steps that we could be doing related to equity, acknowledge some of the challenges in the equity work, specifically gaining consensus on the importance of it, organizing it, having shared understanding of a mission and vision and strategic plan towards working towards those equity goals. So that was how the bulk of the time was spent, as well as the Park District was also there present.
Thanks for covering it.
Okay, thank you, Ray. And the last one is equity committee.
So at our last meeting, we had extensive discussion about what equity means and what it doesn't mean to our different committee members. It kind of pivoted really fast to actual policy discussion, which kind of, I don't know, it surprised me. So they had also been given a task of looking at some preliminary policy and what they looked like, and we tried to give very different examples. So it kind of quickly pivoted to that, and based on those discussions, at the end, we decided, it was the consensus that they'd like to look at more and provide actual feedback to us in writing or highlighting of those policies. I was gonna send out a reminder today and I forgot, because we had asked for that second round of feedback by Friday, and I haven't heard anything from anybody, so I was gonna send a reminder, but I'll do that tomorrow. And I had also said, if you need more time, let us know, because what we had originally thought, the 3 of us would then take that information in December and kind of talk through it and work through it, but we decided to postpone that to January and give us more time, because really.
And
the
give
next-
them more time, really.
It gives
to-
them more time, us more time, and the next meeting isn't scheduled till mid to late January. I think it's the 17th.
And the initial plan was not to have them look at more policies, but
Yeah.
because they had some specific feedback and some things, we felt that giving them not a requirement, but the opportunity to look
Yeah.
at more if they wanted to give a little more feedback, we felt like that couldn't hurt.
Yeah, and some of the committee members had provided me with feedback, because in the original document, I was given them a space to put notes or offered, if you want to write in your email or privately or at the meeting, you can do so. So I did get some from that initial round, so we'll see if we get some more. We had a couple shifts. One of the adult members couldn't participate anymore. So unfortunately, she had to drop out. I think, yeah, and we made use of the virtual option, so we had somebody with a real tight schedule, so we were able to port them in, and that was good. Because then they got to participate, and I think it worked well, to have that option for those that couldn't make it, kind of like the first meeting. So both meetings, we did have virtual representation.
Thank you. All right, next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. I move that we approve Tuesday, December 14th, 2021 consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Second by Mr. Hitzke. Will secretary please call the roll?
Harley,
Yes, aye.
Hitzke.
Aye.
Gallegos.
Aye.
Pelletier,
Aye.
Rose,
Aye.
Fingerhut, aye, St. Clair.
Hi,
Okay, next up is executive session. I move that the Board of Education enter into executive session at 8:57 PM for the purposes of appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees of the public body. Discussion of collective negotiating matters between the public body and its employees, and discussion of minutes lawfully closed under the Open Meetings Act.
Oh, second.
Second by Mrs. Fingerhut. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Holly,
Aye.
Fingerhut, aye, Gallegos.
Aye.
St. Clair. Aye. Rose,
Aye.
Hitzke.
Aye.
Pelletier.
Okay, we are reconvening in open session at 9:29 PM. Secretary, please call the roll.
Holly,
Here.
Rose.
Here.
St. Clair.
here,
Hitzke.
Here.
Gallegos.
Here.
Fingerhut, here, Pelletier.
Here.
I move that the board approve the November 16, 2021 executive session minutes as presented.
Second.
Secretary, please call the roll.
Holly,
Aye.
Fingerhut, aye, Gallegos.
Aye.
Pelletier,
Aye.
St. Clair. Aye. Hitzke.
Aye.
Rose.
Aye.
Okay, president's prerogative. I've already sent you the board exit slip. Please fill that out. Anything for the good of the board, including topics we would want to see on an upcoming agenda, besides some of the stuff that we talked about earlier tonight that we will be working on.
That's just something I heard earlier this afternoon or late afternoon, that the State Board of Education is thinking about recommending having 3 standardized tests during the year rather than just one. So you get more information on that. Pass that along.
Will do.
And there's a group of state legislators that don't like that idea.
Anything else anyone on their mind?
Next month is the mid-year review. So everything that we went over during the summer about plans and what we're doing, we'll be bringing data back to you for that meeting.
Okay, I was gonna say, everyone have a happy holiday. Some people have already had a happy holiday, I think. If you could tell by Christie's Facebook post how much fun she's having.
My birthday is next week, so I can enjoy that.
Oh, there you go. Okay, so the next meeting is on Tuesday, January 25th. Say something else and now I've forgotten what I was gonna say. I don't know. Have a great holiday, everyone, and we will see you next year. I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
At 9:31.
Nowadays, everybody.